Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hack the Planet podcast. We are joined today by a very special guest. We have Amanda Russo, Malware unicorn, red teamer, malware analyst, and now malware developer, and amazing security trainer, whose trainings are available at malwareunicorn.org. Say hello, Amanda.
Hello, everybody.
We're also joined by our usual panel. We have Mitchell.
Howdy, everybody.
Justin.
Hello.
Max.
Hello.
Dan.
Hey, folks. How's it going?
And Virus.
Hello.
Big group today. So, Amanda, I'm a huge fan of your reverse engineering and malware development trainings. Specifically, I just spent about a month staring into your OSX DILD. How do you pronounce that? DYLD?
Yeah, dild. Well, I would say dialed, but some people say dild. I think dild sounds really awkward.
I say dialed.
Yeah, I've been saying DILD and then feeling weird about it every time I say it.
Yeah.
Because then you're like DILD, for OSX, and you have to be really careful about slurring.
Dild for Mako is even worse.
Yeah. So, but I had an old friend who used to call that the particular accent of the autodidact, which is where you've only ever read something and you have no idea how to pronounce it. So dialed. I like dialed. Dialed. Okay. Anyway, so I recently released a project that was the universal loader for Golang. So I did this library for Golang where it has the same interface in Go no matter what platform you run it on, and it lets you load a shared library. So there's a Windows loader, a Linux loader, and an OSX loader backend. And I totally wrote the OSX loader completely out of your training.
Oh, sweet.
And I know, so while I was, I'm a bit of a hermit, so I'm not that familiar with, what else is going on the internet outside of GitHub. But I looked at the sources that you referenced in the OSX training, because I was like, what was the source material for this? Like, who came up with this method originally or whatever? And you linked back to this Black Hat talk from Synac. And I went back to the Black Hat talk to see, it's like, what other details were in there. And that whole training came from like one slide in a Black Hat deck. And then I was like, oh, this is an enormous amount of sort of original work that actually went into this training. So I don't know much else about you, but I know that you're pretty hardcore.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun making all that shellcode in there. I was lucky enough to actually get to write some assembly by hand for this one, but it came in handy.
So just to go through a little bit about what's in the training, the general idea is that when you're doing a loader, you're trying to like load a shared library, and OSX actually gives you, like, without touching disk is the goal, right? So you want to go from a byte array that contains an image of a library to having that loaded in memory so that you can call functions inside it. And OSX is a little bit unique in the operating systems in that it actually gives you a couple of system calls that let you load a library from a byte array. And normally that's not something that's super easy to do. Normally they want you to go through the system loader. I'd really recommend this training to anybody, but the core trick is the system calls that you need to make to load the library are in another library that's loaded called it's the dynamic loader library, which is DYLD, however you pronounce that. So you have to find that in memory, and then find the exports and for the two functions you need, and then call the functions. But there's really an amazing amount of detail in the training that isn't in any other online source that I've seen. So I really wanted to ask you, like right off the bat, kind of what went into developing that. If there's any other sort of salient details.
Yeah, so one of the things that I liked about switching to being an offensive security person is I get to write tools and malware and stuff. And so one of the things I liked was switching from Windows to OS X. So a lot of this is like part of me learning more about OS X, and learning like compared to the NTDLL loader in Windows, comparing it to the OS X one, it's a little bit similar and a little bit different in a way. So the fact that you have to find DILD in memory kind of sucks, and the way you do it is really ghetto, and that you have to just keep finding the next header in memory and then checking if the address is legit, and then trying to check the name of the process in memory, or the dilib in memory, and then finding it that way, which it sucks. But then having everything off of a normal offset, if you just keep going down that list, you'll eventually find it. And once you have the DILD or dilid, however you want to say it, then you can do anything from there and parse out the symbols, which is great. And then you can use those. Once you use those functions and you cast the function and you're able to use it, then you can load up whatever dilid you want, or dilib you want, as long as you change the header. And I think I mentioned that in the tutorial there. You have to change one flag in the header of the dilib in order to get it to run like that. So
yeah, you have to change it to a bundle.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the library you want to load has to be a bundle, because the dilid call that you need to use like checks to make sure it's a bundle. There were some other weird tricks in there too. Basically, when you're walking, you have to just walk forward in memory and look for macOS or Mako headers, which marks the beginning of a library image.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're walking forward in memory, there's another trick, which is super important to avoid seg faulting,
yep.
right? Because you could be, when you're walking through the virtual memory space, you could hit on an invalid address. And if you just try and straight access that, you're going to crash. So there's another trick in the training, which is about using system calls. It was actual system calls like chdir or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
As a way of avoiding a seg fault, because they'll return different things if memory is valid or not valid without crashing. And this is all just deep OS X voodoo. But it was really, I never would have gotten through that by myself. I can say that 100%.
I'm very curious, and back to what you said, Og. When Og and I were working on a rewrite of Backdoor Factory, we had a hell of a time finding good information on Mako and its structure and just information on it. How much of this were you able to find in resources, and how much did you have to figure out by yourself?
Well, I did have some of the, what is his name? The OS X inside internal books. I read some of those, and some of them I just sit there and read the source. And I think in some of the things there, did I put it in this? Okay, I put some of the links to the actual kernel code, the Xenu kernel code. So I would sit there and go through and read the actual open sourced headers and everything, and trying to see like how do you parse the Mako headers, and how and go look at the functions, the actual functions that are being called, so you can understand like what they return and what they're doing. But some of these were like I mentioned that I referenced a resource that talks about those functions. So if you take that and then go look at the actual kernel code, then you can figure out what's going on. There's more other juicy functions in kernel code that you can also access. I didn't get really much of a chance. I was more focused on getting this done quickly. I only had like a month to really make something like this. So
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Uh,
It took me 2 months to get through the universal thing, and I was copying lots of other people's code.
I think there's a lot of people out there that are looking for this exact information, and they don't know. If they knew this was there, they would be like, oh, it would be a gold mine, right? There's just so many people.
I remember reading about reading that source just to grok how the mock library worked under the code, because so much of it is like purposefully, it seems like undocumented by Apple, but you can just go read a chunk of the open source code, and it's like anytime you see a missing chunk, you can just assume that's something they moved to their magic RPC server in their hidden little sock someplace. But man, so many dragons.
Well, yeah, I ended up reading through a fair amount of the Dylid code also, and I was very excited initially when I remembered that, oh yeah, the guts of OS X, Darwin are open source. Like I can just go read this code. And then I went and looked at the code, and I was like, actually, this is awful. It's the kind of source code that makes you sad. Like they do a lot of error checking that will force a crash. It's just like it's some of the worst source code I think I've seen.
There's also a lot of stuff that like calls the internet for no reason.
Yeah,
where it's like the Apple version of an open source tool that like helps you by updating a resource that just pulls from a random place on the internet with absolutely no checking of crypto.
So that was actually, I think we might have accidentally. So when I was implementing my loader from the code in the training, the only thing I really had to change from the training, which you already just said, so I might accidentally be outing something that was left in there broken on purpose. But the code in the training kind of made me think that Dylid was always going to be the next image ahead of your base image in memory. And it isn't. It's sometimes like 2 or 3 up. So you really do need to, like, you scan for the OS X or the Mako magic number, and then you do need to look at the image name. And if it's not Dylid, move on to the next one. So that was the only bit I really had to change from what was in the training. But everything else just sort of worked out of the box, and I was really just sort of marveling, like, who made this? Like what,
this is the kind of documentation that we need.
Yeah. And the other trainings on that site, so you've got some reverse engineering trainings, RE101 and RE102, I think.
Yeah.
And which are just sort of basic like malware analysis and I guess advanced malware analysis. I also like one of those from a conference that you did is on YouTube. There might be more. So I've looked through those and I saw you do one of the trainings on video, and I'm really kind of blown away by how effectively you can kind of put all of the information in the right order and explain it in a clear way where people can follow along. So
Little does anybody know, I actually have a graphic design degree. So a lot of this stuff comes naturally for me.
So you really have a lot of experience in like presenting information in a consumable way.
Yeah, just changed careers last minute, and I can still use it.
Yeah, graphic designer.
That's a rare pivot, and I've never heard of that. Yeah.
That's actually incredible, because I've known a lot of really excellent hackers, but it's a very small minority of them that can effectively explain what it is they're doing. And
on top of that, the want to do so, to take the time to make slides that are have such a good explanation and step by step. And obviously, it helps to have a graphics design degree while you're doing that, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, I was going to ask. I was going to ask you specifically about the malwareunicorn.org site because it's like totally beautiful, and it's like obviously there's a lot of customizations for training. And I did a little, like I ran the what runs plugin on it to try and figure out if it was like a WordPress skin I could steal or something. But I was going to ask sort of what is that totally custom or what is that?
Yeah, so I sat down one day, I was like, I'm going to learn some React. And there's like this tool that Google put out. You can convert your Google Docs into like one of these trainings. I think, I forgot the name of it, but I can share it later. And it'll convert whatever you wrote in a GDoc and turn it into like the nice UI there. I just kind of switch it up a little bit to have the colors that I want. But most of it is just sitting on my GitHub pages, and it just like serves from there. So
Super cool. Yeah, I've sat down on several different days and tried to learn React, but still can't write React.
yeah, I wanted to talk about that. So growing up, I did not have a great experience learning computer science or coding or anything like that. So a lot of it was either on the job or, me taking more time on the weekend to catch up. And so for me, it's like an incentive to give back to people, to teach them in a way that I would want to be taught. Um, going through school, I almost failed my assembly class until I got, actually talked to the teacher a little bit. So looking back, I'm so glad that I can give back to people in a way to teach them a little bit about, what I've learned.
I was so gonna point that out. The way that you present it, there's some motive behind there for giving back that is obvious in your presentation, and that's what I was wondering about. And you just explained it. Why that's.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about in previous episodes, sort of like the old hacker culture being mostly about kind of beating each other up, like hacking each other's IRC channels or whatever. And it wasn't very welcoming. It was more kind of everyone was sort of, fighting with each other and developing skills that way. And then we all get old and realize, that we need to hire like 10 more security engineers for our team, and there just aren't security engineers to hire, and then so everyone's sort of going back and being like, well, maybe we need to spend more time on training, or we need to actually have some kind of training program that's not just you're stupid, like get smarter, and so I with that in mind, it's like I'm always super interested when I come across somebody who seems to have a real gift for doing like security training, right? Because part of it is it has to be more hands-on than other kinds of training, because there's some kind of intuition you have to help people build. So I wanted to ask you kind of a little bit more about your philosophy of how to do a training. How do you think about presenting this kind of information?
How to do a training? Well, I'm a very visual person. So for me to explain something in like a diagram or in like one concept per image, even with slides, like I try to do one concept per slide and keep things big sentences, big letters, whatever, just so that people can digest something in one instance rather than like a page kill by what is it, PowerPoint, with just like a page of text.
Death by PowerPoint.
Yeah, death by I think that's kind of what I go for, and of course things have to look nice. It's kind of one of my downfalls on getting things done is making sure it looks nice the way I want it to. So that's another factor. But as far as like trying to understand something, I kind of want to break it down into the most basic thing possible. Like, how do I explain this to somebody who is not in the field? I always have to think about that. Like, how do I explain this to my mom or my sibling, or someone who just entered the field? Maybe it just comes with time in order to take these abstract ideas and like turn them into something more concrete. You just have to use like a lot of metaphors and everything.
I had a great teacher one time who told me that when I'm trying to break down concepts, think about trying to communicate to a very smart 11 or 12-year-old, even if it's an adult. And I kind of see what they were saying. It made a lot of sense to me in that sense, because some people just don't have natural talents in certain areas. So break it down to that level, and it's easier to understand for people that have a hard time.
Explaining stuff to my mom's probably a bad example, specifically because she doesn't actually care about anything computer related. She's just, every time I'm talking, she's just trying to figure out if I'm happy or not. And then once she figures out if I'm happy or not, she's like, oh, that's all I wanted to know. Right. So
Yeah, I think one of the examples is like, if I'm talking to someone, I think I did this to one of the journalists before, and I was trying to explain what it means to have different architectures, like ARM versus Intel and all that, and why the new MacBook, that's the M1 that's coming out, or that came out, what's different. And I explained it in like, okay, so you have a car brand, right? And that car brand uses different chassis that come from two different companies. And so these chassis are not interchangeable, but the hardware that you put on them are the same, but it's built for that chassis. So the chassis is essentially a different architecture. And then it kind of like a light bulb hit in their head, and they were like, oh wow, now I completely understand what you mean, why certain software doesn't work on a particular operating system, or architecture. So things like that, just really simple.
That makes me think it might be an advantage to have other sort of non-tech information so that you can sort of use those concepts to communicate with other people. And I'm just suddenly thinking like the people that I know that are really focused on one thing and they can be really, really good at it. Those are the people that have a lot of trouble sort of up-leveling concepts or kind of communicating what they're doing to other people. So something just clicked in my head. Well, so you mentioned that you started out working on graphic design. I'm wondering kind of how did you get into infosec in the first place?
Yeah, this was a fun story. So I actually went to school for graphic design and art. I mean, I still do it on the side. But in college, I switched to computer science last minute. Mainly because my dad, he's also in the infosec industry, and he told me, hey, go take a computer science class with your brother so he doesn't fail. And so I was like, okay. So I took a class, and I realized that I loved it, became a tutor and a lab instructor. Probably was like one of the only 4 girls to graduate that I remember. And it just like blossomed from there. So after that, I knew since my dad was sort of in the field, I kind of knew of these job titles, and like what a reverse engineer was or a network security person was, and I didn't know exactly what they did. I just knew that maybe I should be one of those people. So first job out of college, I went to work for the DoD doing some analyst work or forensics work, and worked my way up the chain there to get where I am now. It was a grind, though. I mean, I used to image hard drives and take them out of the case and break a nail, and then eventually I did worked my way up to learn how to do intrusion investigations. So
that is not a common first job out of college.
No, it's not.
It's getting a little bit more common. these days, but
I think it's common for college kids who have no like background, so they can get their clearance.
Yeah, but forensics is really boring. Or it has the potential of being incredibly boring. Like,
hence why I learned a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but boy, picking through an NTFS journal is like something I also did in my early 20s, and I'm glad that I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah,
it's certainly a good way to learn about some of this stuff is because you end up getting if you're doing forensics investigation, you end up learning so much about like the actual exploitation process, and like because you're like, okay, how exactly did this happen? Even if you're just doing sort of recovery and not even doing a full forensic investigation.
So you're a second generation infosec person. There really aren't that many of those out there.
Pretty sure that's the first for our show too.
It's the first. Yeah, it's the first one we've talked to anyway.
Yeah.
I think you're the first person I talked to in general. The second generation.
I'm racking my brain. I think I might have met one other person who had a parent who was like one of the people that escorted crypto keys around with a handgun or something, which was technically infosec in the 70s.
That's quite a literal interpretation of infosec, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my dad is like one of the people that works for insurance companies now and like works with the ransomware victims. But when he was in his heyday, he helped stand up the FBI SOC, so I think he, knew a little bit.
Well, that explains the school track.
Yeah.
Because I'm over here listening to everybody talk about these like likely college stories, and I'm just like, college? What?
So if you want to be as good at infosec stuff as you, like step one, like have different parents. No. So I gotta ask too. You mentioned that your dad asked you to take this class so that your brother wouldn't fail.
Yeah. Oh, he failed.
Was that oh yeah.
Nice.
But was that just to make sure he showed up, or like so he'd have some competition, or what was?
No, like to someone help him with his projects and homework. We weren't in the same class, but we took classes at the same time. But he eventually got a girlfriend that kind of like ruined his school life. So he just never showed up anymore, and I just kept going.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So after the DoD, what did you end up doing?
Well, I realized like how shit the pay was. So I don't know if I can curse, but
oh yeah.
Okay. So I had decided to go to like, commercial intrusions. So I did a lot of commercial breach investigations. I think one of the investigations I did wound up on like Krebs on security one year. It was epic. But I did the forensics for that. After that, I was like, man, I can't keep traveling because I had just gotten a puppy. So I had to like move somewhere. So I moved to the Bay Area. And then I worked at FireEye. I landed at FireEye, which was an interesting job. I got there right before the IPO, so that worked out.
I was going to say, was that pre or post merger?
Yeah.
So I've had a couple other friends that worked at FireEye, and they really learned a lot by seeing malware, basically.
Yeah. Is it Mandiant FireEye or FireEye?
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
Because like that's actually I have actually had that experience. I've actually walked into a room and said it one way and had one person say it the other way and look at the other person, and then the other person looks at me and says, "No, it's the other," and like they actually fight about this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I came in on the normal FireEye side, so it was mostly malware research. So I had to write a lot of the rules that they use in their VM, which was interesting. I got to see a lot of malware. Yeah, their VM.
In air quotes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I would be looking at at least. I would try to process through like 50,000 samples and try to, bubble up a lot of those. So I've seen a lot. But after the IPO, everybody started to leave. All the great people started to leave. And so you're just sitting there, well, I don't have any fun people to work around anymore. So might as well move on to something else. And that's when I wound up at Endgame.
Oh, I was gonna ask, like, you ended up at like Bloomberg for a while, right?
Oh no, I just did that Bloomberg Live event, so which was scary. I don't think I want to talk in front of venture capitalists ever again. But yeah. These journalists, they'll come up to you like, hey, you want to do something for speaking in front of people live? And I'm like, okay. When you're working for a startup, they want you to do a lot of PR stuff for them. So
Yeah.
That's how I ended up giving my first DEF CON talk.
yeah.
I was working for a startup, and they were like, "Go to DEF CON, give a talk," and I was like, "Yeah, they don't let you do vendor pitches," and they were like, "We don't care. It's like good press."
Yeah. Any press is press, right?
Was that your Lisp talk?
No, that was a couple talks later, but that was the talk where I discovered I had a paralyzing fear of public speaking. So you had a quote. You have all this like really sort of deep technical experience, and an amazing ability to kind of up level it and kind of extract the core concepts and present them to people who don't necessarily understand anything about the topic. But the thing that also really caught my attention is I don't know quite how to explain it, but you're also trying to communicate why it's fun or why it's interesting.
Oh yeah.
So I actually wrote down a quote from one of your the trainings that I watched online. So forgive this is a little paraphrase, but you said you kind of tried to motivate it up front, and you said there's always more things to reverse, and everything in life that you want to learn, you have to take things apart to figure it out, to figure out how they work. And I thought that was just like, I'm totally going to steal that, basically. But your example was that you took your clothes apart to learn how to sew.
Oh yeah. When I was younger, I used to do this a lot. I would like take two different pieces and splice them together, or take things apart and try to make something new with it. It kind of like, if you play with Legos, I think that's one of the things, like you take apart a Lego set and you build something else with it, right? Or you take a portion of it and use it in somewhere else. So it the same concept with everything I do, I guess. It's like reverse engineer your life.
So I'm curious only because my better half also does that, like literally takes clothing apart to like figure out how to make different versions of it. And she always talks about how, or at least the way she does it, is she takes the stuff apart and then makes a pattern out of it, and then uses the pattern to make the actual clothing. And like I'm asking because one of my like side projects that I guess is like a honeydew list item, I don't know, it seems weird to call it that, is training an ML bot thing to size a reverse engineered pattern, because apparently like you can't obviously I don't actually know what I'm doing when it comes to sewing. Like you can't actually do that, right? Because like some parts of it don't scale linearly within like one measurement to the next, right?
Mm-hmm,
There's some art to it.
Well, also I think the how stretchy the fabric is that's involved.
The bias.
Yeah. Wait, what did you call that? There's a technical term?
The bias? Yeah. Like if it's cut on the bias, it's like the way the fabric stretches.
Huh.
It's like there's the diagonal stretch too.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so is that what you do? Do you make like a pattern out of it, or do you just like YOLO? I'm just gonna take this apart and be awesome.
No. It's more of like, I don't know. I'm one of those type of people that like to feel fabrics and see how like it works, because I like to like feel how they are, because that's like your groundwork of what you're working with, right? It's like your medium So it's the same with like tools, and what you use with the tools. So depending on how it stretches or how the pattern lays and everything, it all determines on like what type of pattern you're going to make for it, or even where like all the darts and points you connect them. But it sounds like your better half might be interested in reverse engineering.
You know, I tell her that all the time, and like she's been coming to DEF CON almost as long as I have, and she keeps being like, "No, not technical," and I'm like, "I don't know."
So speaking of groundwork and tooling, when you were first learning reverse engineering and assembly language, did you have any particular influences, authors, books, resources, or just things that you reverse engineered yourself that really that you would call like the cornerstone of your learning, or you really look back and say that helped me a lot, that these resources are like what got me into it or what got me really going?
Well, when you're in government, maybe it's reverse engineering. You're assigned like a mentor, mentee kind of start when you get into the field. And one of the things that he made me do was go through the Lena tutorials, the reverse engineering Lena tutorials, and that's basically most of my foundation. Like even though I did okay in assembly, like that was the one training that helped me do a lot of reverse engineering. And then on the job learning, I think one of my first malware that I got to do was poison ivy. I don't know if you've messed with poison ivy. It was kind of
That one
yeah.
takes me back, man.
Yeah. So, having that to start with, that helped a lot to like set the groundwork of solving a puzzle.
Was it like the old school one, or was it like the after Dark Comet came out and they ripped off a bunch of stuff from Dark Comet one?
I think this
Not
was
even
before
funny.
Dark Comet, but I do like Dark Comet.
Yeah, man. There was like a golden age, right? It was like Poison Ivy and Dark Comet and Black Hole and and what was the other one? It's like it had like like Nimrod or some weird name like that. Man,
Yeah.
nostalgia.
Yeah.
So I always pronounce those the Lena tutorials because I thought it was like someone's name was Lena.
Oh, is that how you're supposed to say it? I always say
I
Lena.
have no idea. But I actually will link to those in the program notes. But there's like 41 different levels or something like that. And they've gotten a little bit harder to find on the internet, but I actually just tracked those down again relatively recently. Like there's a mirror of the whole set.
Yeah, I think they start out with like a lot of cracking, like program cracking, which is fun. I mean, you're gonna need to learn that to get around like anti-analysis stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, the Lena or Lena tutorials are it's a really common thing to hear that somebody started out on those for the malware reversing side. It's kind of like for exploit development. There's another site that almost everybody starts out on, which is Gera's Insecure Programming. And those they're kind of like the Lena levels, but really focused on exploit development on different platforms. And there's like nothing about cracking at all. But those are it kind of speaks to how rare really good trainers are. That there aren't, dozens of these things. There's really just a handful of them.
Yeah.
And that when you ask somebody who's like really good at something, like, what did you start out on? They almost always say one of a handful of things instead of all different things.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to there being so many positions in the industry unfilled. Goes back to that lack of good training. We need more good training.
Yes. Well, I've already been pointing people at malwareunicorn.org a lot, especially because that's like the thing. If you're doing OSX malware at this point, that's the most fleshed out resource I've seen. And it links back to that Synac deck, which is like one slide on every topic, which is not enough information to actually do anything. But at least it'll send you into the right part of the Darwin code, where then you can suffer.
Which is really important, right? Because like Apple and the way that their ecosystem works, like there's not as much impetus on the Windows ecosystem to keep up with things, right? Because it's like that for cross compatibility and the fact that like so many of the world governments entirely run on Microsoft, like the old stuff isn't going away, right? So they may come out with a new way tomorrow, but the old way is going to work for at least another 10 years. And Apple, when something gets deprecated, you got like a week, and then all of a sudden, like everything's patched on the new version. And it's like the change is a big, I end up referring, like I've recently had to refer to the content on your site because like the only stuff out there on the thing I'm looking at is like, well, I'll just go read the code, but I need to know where to go look. So I'll go look at like the Maxis internals, like 3-part handbook, or I'll look at like Dino's book that he put out a few years ago to see if it's referenced. And either there won't be anything in there because the structure's too new, or it is referenced, but like even before I finish reading the paragraph, I know that this is old and like half of it's been like deprecated, and that means that some of it still works, but some of it doesn't work, and Apple doesn't tell you which parts of it are which. And so I end up just like, well, let's see if Malware Integran's already written about this. Oh, yep, okay, now I know where to go look.
Yeah, I also took, when I went to Recon, I also took Stefan SR's OSX kernel exploitation class, which was really good. He was the one that kind of like pushed you to read a lot of the kernel code. So I think that helped with, just getting into that mode of, okay, so nothing's documented for Apple. Let's go read any of the open source code and like start from there. So if you ever get a chance to take his course, it's a good learning experience. Even though it may not be applicable to your everyday job, it's good to see how he looks at patches and does things.
And he's a machine too. Like, so he was previously famous for just continuously destroying everything related to PHP for like a decade, and then at some point he decided PHP is dead. I'm gonna switch to iOS and like Apple stuff, and then he's just been sitting on destroying Apple stuff ever since.
Mm-hmm.
But then WordPress happened and they saved PHP, and now we still have.
I wanted to. I wasn't quite done with the fashion topic yet. So all of the hackers we talk to have some other interest that they also get like super into, and like some people are into like messing with their cars. We just talked to somebody who he's like a gunsmith. He's like obsessed with restoring old guns. And then we've got Virus here who's into eating old meat.
Oh,
he likes to call it some fancy Japanese aged something, but it's basically just old meat. He gets meat and then he lets it get old and then he eats it. but it's like fancy for some reason.
Man, I also make my own gin and like play music and stuff.
There you go.
So bougie dry meat.
yeah, basically.
Didn't go with the old meat.
But so do you have a lot of fashion or clothes based projects?
Yeah, I wanted to actually start a fashion business, but that's probably later in life. But now, it's hard to like start things and then finish them. Even now, I think when I was just first getting pregnant with my little one here, I wanted to make a game. Like I wanted to make my own little multi platform, kind of like the Clash of Clans, but for hacking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm in the concept phase at the moment. So it's hard to find time right now to do my day job and like come back and like code stuff and draw stuff. But it all depends on like what the flavor is that year of what type of side project I want to do.
I saw a game kind of like that once at an anime con of all places.
Oh really?
It was a startup that had made like a RPG Final Fantasy style like JRPG clone.
Mm-hmm.
With like you could tell that like they spent all the money on like licensing the art from like Comet or something, and the way you fought was they would give you like these small, like they were basically data objects, and you had to like modify them in some way, and you'd write like a little blob of JavaScript. It was all based around JavaScript, and like that's how you fought like enemies, is you wrote blobs of JavaScript, and like the whole time the character is like standing there and the music's playing. It's like Final Fantasy, and they're like, they're like sitting there in stasis, and then you write your code and you hit enter, and it would like run, and if it errored, they'd like punch themselves, or if it ran but it wasn't effective, it'd be like, because this whole thing.
Can we do that? Can we do that with assembly, please? That would be.
It sounds kind of like Screeps. Oh, there is a game like that for assembly. It's by
Is there?
there's a couple games by a local company here, Zachtronics. And Zach even like he's come out to DEF CON and stuff too. But then everybody, I think I was really drunk when I met him, and I gave him a big hug and told him he was going to save humanity, and it got weird. But he made two games. I mean, as I do, right? But he's made two games. One is like TIS 100, where you solve puzzles with this. He made his own little assembly language, which is pretty close to real assembly language, and it's a puzzle game where you have a limited number of lines to write assembly instructions, and you get more points for writing the most efficient code that like solves it. And it's like massively kind of parallel, so there's like blocks of code that talk to each other. It's really simple, but it's really complicated, and it's an amazing game. It's on Steam. But then he did another game, which actually you write chunks of assembly, and then you also kind of build a hardware board around it. And there's different levels and puzzles and things like that. And it's called Shenzhen IO. And Shenzhen IO is up until I just lost like 2.5 days to Evil Genius 2, but the amount of time I lost to Shenzhen IO is like a month and a half. And I still feel I still feel guilty sometimes that I'm not playing Shenzhen IO. That's how hard it gripped me. It's like Civilization bad in terms of addictiveness.
He also made the first Minecraft before Mojang ripped off the idea.
Oh, really? I didn't know anything about that.
Yep.
So, I mean, like, I personally think in kind of tying it back to the vein of training, like, I'm really fascinated and interested. I want to see more investment in gamifying the tools, the techniques, the process of becoming good at assembly, native development. Like, there are these real, like, a lot of, I mean, everybody recording today, right? Like, you learned these things through commitment and diligence. It wasn't exactly designed to be accessible in any way, shape, or form. And the further we make investments in gamification, I feel like that's just really widening the spectrum and accessibility of that material, right? Like, you can get people.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that stuff is really cool.
There is one other local project I'd like to kind of flag on this topic, which is Robot Turtles. So Robot Turtle started as a Kickstarter a couple years ago. It's a game that is designed. You can play it with kids as young as like 3 or 4, and you can make it more complicated as they get older. But it basically teaches the fundamental programming concepts like branching and having a set of instructions. And it's kind of like making Logo, the old computer program to teach kids how to program from the 80s. It kind of makes that where you move the turtle around. So you write a Logo program, and it says the turtle like changes his line color to red, and he steps forward 10 steps, and then he turns right, and he steps forward 5 steps, and then he turns right, and then you can draw all kinds of stuff with like Logo instructions. And in the beginning, you just sort of make a mess because you don't know what you're doing, but you can actually basically do kind of like vector art with it. If you get good. Of course, that was for an Apple II, and like that's kind of garbage now, but they basically made Logo into a card game where you set these like gems out on a map, and then the kid has to steer the turtle to the gems by creating a stack of cards with instructions, and then you turn the cards over one at a time and move the turtle around. I actually got that for my sister, and she played it with her daughter when she was 4 or 5. And this was kind of like I was trying to secretly teach my niece how to program without her realizing it was happening. And I had just asked her recently, like, well, what do you think of robot turtles? And she's like, I love robot turtles. And I was kind of like, why? And she was like, because I get to tell mommy what to do, basically. I was like, she puts the cards down and like she just loves it because like she sets up the sequence of actions and then her mom like does what the actions say to do, and that's the kind of the level she's interacting with it at. But I thought it was pretty cool. But there aren't a lot of. I mean, I think guys like the Apple II kind of stuff aimed at 6-year-olds was probably where I first learned how to program. And it seems like kids now are sort of growing up with smartphones running all the time, like YouTube videos or whatever. And it seems really abstracted away from how those things actually work. There's like a user experience, which is different from understanding how the thing works, right?
Yeah. There's also, I don't know if they've upgraded it, but have you heard of like Lego Mindstorms?
Oh yeah.
Man.
Yeah,
definitely.
that's
I
what
had
I
one
had.
Yeah.
I was jealous of all the kids with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had one of the first kits of that, and I remember, like, I was at just the right age where I had just started to learn a little bit of C because I was up to no good by then. And the Mindstorms, they actually published a C API with like the very first version. And like, man, I remember thinking it was so cool because I was like programming a robot C that I like barely knew. And my mom was a third grade teacher, so she used to get all these like one-off like educational aids. That it's kind of like how doctors get like pill samples for free because they're trying to like move units. So like teachers kind of get the same thing. So my mom would have all these like one-off units of educational stuff. And most of them were like, dumb little like, letters backwards. You're trying to like, whatever. But I remember one of the things she had also was called Capsula. I don't know if it's still around. And it's like erector, like think erector set, but like everything's in its own little plastic bubble and they're all standard. So they fit together like Legos, but they have like an electric motor in it and like a ballast and like a switch and a servo. And like, so you build these like kind of analog modular robots and they were all like hermetically sealable. So you can make like little submarines and stuff. It's great.
I think it is really great how much of that exists now. I wish I would have had more of that growing up. I do see a little bit of a difference in the type of stuff that we see on your page, and is a little bit more. These are the kinds of things that a person has to really delve into on their own, right? And really want to do. And when I was 20 years ago, studying the area that I loved, there just wasn't any documentation yet, and people were still having to figure everything out for themselves. And I feel like these types of trainings that you do are this in between. This is for after all the kids have done all this cool stuff that they have, the turtle games and the kid games and stuff, right? And then they get to look for if they want to stay with computers, find the area that they're passionate about, and then not have to look really, really hard to find information about it or figure it all out themselves. We're going to have a generation of, if we have people that keep producing more good content like this, like yourself, then we're going to have a generation of people that have access to that information more quickly and don't have to figure it out themselves and spend hours and days and weeks. Although I guess that's part of it too,
Yeah.
right?
It's like those darn kids back in my day. But I completely understand. Like it's trying to, and there's a difference between giving everybody the information and then like leading a horse to water, right? You can't, in a way, when you're teaching, you can't really give them the answer. You have to have them discover it as well. And I think I've done this a little bit in my workshops where I tell them to recognize patterns and get to a goal rather than show them what the answer is. And I think that'll help them from like memorizing content versus like discovering it for themselves.
So now,
yeah.
Now that you have a little one, I'm kind of wondering, and you have this like aptitude for doing technical trainings. I'm really kind of curious, like, you know, are you going to try to teach your kid technical stuff at some point?
Yeah, I mean, she's already like jabbing keys on my keyboard, trying to mimic me. So I think it's more about puzzle solving or problem solving. Because that's how I describe my job, is just like I'm just solving a bunch of problems. And like trying to think outside the box. That's one of the things that she should learn, is like taking basic concepts and trying to apply them to something different. So hopefully when she gets older and she can put blocks into different block shapes, maybe she'll have some problem solving skills. If not, oh well, and I'll still love her.
And let me tell you, that moment where they figure out that the keyboard they're tapping on doesn't actually do anything, and they get super mad, and they're like, "No, I want to type on that keyboard that you're using because it actually changes the screen." Like, oh, so much of that tech babysitter goes away.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh no, she already does that with like remotes and phones. Like she beelines to my phone because she knows that she can swipe it already, and she's only 9 months old.
Just hook up the keyboard to a Perl interpreter. I'm sure it'll turn into some sort of programming at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, my father's already asking me, like, hey, can she pick locks yet?
Nice.
Thank God, no.
Yeah, mine's 3, and he hasn't successfully done it, but he's gone through my picks and he's pulled one out and he's stuffed them in a lock to quote unquote see what it would do. So like, I'm sure that day is coming, and like his sister will be born in a few weeks. So that it's like, I wonder if she's gonna outrun him. I wonder who's gonna be the first one.
Well, it sounds like she might be like a little social engineer. She's gonna be the youngest, making the brother do stuff.
Right.
Like go to class.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So you did write-ups on the Flareon Challenges as well, right?
Yeah, I try to do Flareon every year. It depends on how agreeable my husband is, since I spend like a whole month, like all evening working on them. So if I have time, I'll try to like do the whole write-up for the Flareon, or at least some of it. It all depends.
What is Flareon?
It's like these reverse engineering challenges, and I've had like four or five different people mention to me how hard task number 10 on Flareon 7 was this year. I had never heard of it before, and then I look at it and I'm like, wow, that is way beyond my reverse engineering capabilities, and that is awesome. Hashrazad did a write-up on the Flareon 7 task 10 this year.
Oh yeah, I read that she only got through like half of it or something like that, right? Yeah, I remember something about that.
Yeah, it's hard stuff, man.
Yeah, I don't know how folks finish it like within a week, but I just use my evenings, maybe 1 hour or 2 in the evening, to work on it, and I just want to finish it one year, or finish it for that year.
Just 1 year. Just
wow.
1 year, that'd be great.
So they're challenges that are so hard that people typically don't finish them.
Well, some of them can be time consuming, like the last 3, like 7 through 10. Those can be, some can take like a week long, or if you're not familiar with that type of malware that they're referencing, it can be more tedious. I mean, I finished 2 years worth when I had time, but the later challenges definitely take, at least the last one can take a week.
Wow.
And I think the one that I did get to the last one, it was like a full blown, like, it was like PlugX or something, and it had like multiple rounds of encryption and compression that you had to get through. and you had to like take a DLL and try to mock the DLL function in order to use the encryption from that DLL that it was using for the plugin. And so you had to do that like for 7 rounds. So it's just tedious.
Okay, blow our minds with the craziest reverse engineering thing that you've ever done that you can talk about.
Craziest.
Or the yeah, I don't know, hardest, craziest, like most interesting, whatever will blow our minds. Like, what's the craziest reverse engineering thing you've ever done?
I don't think any of them are crazy. I find the more complicated they are, the more interesting it is. Like, I've looked at. I think rats are interesting because they have a lot of different capabilities. I find PlugX and Poison Ivy and X Agent really interesting in that they have a lot of moving pieces, a lot of classes, a lot of plugins and everything. And like you could tell multiple people were working on one project, which is interesting.
Would you say that you found one to be the most interesting out of any that you've done, or?
I think I like anti-analysis techniques. I find those interesting. So I think collecting all of those together is more interesting in that respect. I think the more complicated, like financial type malware that have like anti-analysis techniques in it, I think those are quite interesting. Like evading the analyst, not necessarily like automated analysis. Like
right.
They know that you have a debugger attached and everything, so it's like game on between malware analyst and you.
Can you give us some fun examples of anti-analysis techniques?
Yeah, it's mainly like trying to. I think one of the things is checking if there's a window open, like for a certain debugger or maybe even IDA open. Like they'll go through the list of windows and check the string to see if it's open, or if they check some obscure file if it exists on the file system that you've never heard of. They do a lot of that if you're like working within VMware. Some other things is like they try to hide things on the stack, which I find interesting. Like just the way that they compile their objects. Like they'll break them out into multiple pieces, or encrypt like a whole function and then decrypt it and then run it, which is quite annoying. So you have to work a lot in memory and set a lot of like breakpoints in order to pull that out. But I mean, it gives you a lot of ideas that if you just take all of those things and put them into one malware that you wanted to create, it would be really fun.
So is this how you ended up switching to writing malware more than analyzing it?
Yeah, because I would go look at malware and I'd be like, oh, this is cool. This is really fun. I would do it this way if I could do it. Or I would use this feature and I put them all in one, and then try to make my own. Or things that I've seen that if it gets caught by EDR or something like that, then how would I create it? And so that that kind of like leads me to wanting to write my own malware.
So I wasn't going to plug this, but I had Peter Ferry do a reverse engineer of a virus written by an Australian virus writer. It's retaliation.a. It breaks up into 250 separate metamorphically encrypted parts, and his write-up on it is 39 pages, and we're releasing it'll be in a journal. We're releasing this 20th. You might be interested in that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's like wow, and also for an AV people to say, yeah, there's no use to try to disinfect this. Like it's a lost cause kind of thing.
So the title of the zine is, what is it? Temp out?
Temp.out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
We will be we'll call that out on the Twitter. I've been retweeting their announcements already, but that's definitely something to look for later this month.
Just curious if there's any interesting metamorphic techniques that you've seen in the wild, or that maybe you've implemented yourself.
Metamorphic techniques, just like completely transforming.
So we have a big debate about this, but I like uh, in old school VX in the 90s, we would refer to metamorphic code as code where each iteration of the virus or the malware, the actual code and the bytes change and the instructions change each time, and
Gotcha.
a link.
So I think a good way of breaking it down is polymorphic is something like a cryptor, where like it's just polymorphic is like a cryptor where it's just a key change where it's technically different every time. Metamorphic is kind of, it's more like a quine, if you remember that from it's a computer science toy that doesn't have a lot of practical applications, but a quine is a program that writes itself out. So metamorphic is like it doesn't just sort of re-encrypt itself, it actually kind of regenerates itself in possibly a different configuration.
The control flow changes, and also junk. They'll throw in junk instructions and whole branches of junk of control flow that is just entire junk and does nothing. And
so this is post compilation, right? Not pre compilation or during compilation.
Well, that actually is. So one of the there aren't that many how-tos on how to do like metamorphic stuff, but some of them actually have the thing kind of recompile itself, which I think is like more of a 90s leftover, because this is a giant argument we've been having, but I think this is more of a 90s leftover, because I think having to bundle a decompiler and a compiler with your malware doesn't work so well against a modern malware analysis because you're basically giving them the tools you need to reverse it.
Right.
But there are I think there's sort of the potential for, especially with like virtual machines. So one thing that kind of comes up, there's an anti-cheat technology for video games, which I also don't know how to pronounce, but I usually call it Themida.
Oh yeah, Themida. Yeah.
Themida. Hey, we say that the same. That's the first one. But they have like 3 different virtual machines, or maybe more at this point. But the last time I looked at it, they had 3 different virtual machines, and they could actually kind of switch between which VM they were using under the hood to try and make it more difficult to kind of reverse engineer. And they could have, theoretically, they could have instructions for one virtual machine generate instructions for the other virtual machine.
Isn't Themida? Themida is not the one that Spotify uses, right? I can't remember which.
I've never looked at Spotify, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know Spotify uses one of these sketchy obfuscators. But yeah, I'm familiar with it. Oh, but one of the things I don't know if you've looked at the repo from for LLVM. It's like it does control flow flattening and all different types of features.
The LLVM obfuscator.
Yeah. So that might be applicable, but I don't know why you would want to compile again after the fact. Just sounds like
that's an argument that Ben makes. We when I talk about metamorphism, it's not compile again after the fact. It's the instructions are stored in like blobs that are encrypted inside the file, and when it infects a new file and makes a new generation of itself, it takes those blobs and reformats them in all kinds of ways using real instructions, junk instructions, sometimes adding new control flow branches, but keeping the same behavior of infecting other files. Right? So it doesn't actually have a compiler or decompiler.
So it's more like rearranging modules.
I think
it's code.
I think that's totally possible if you're using like a higher level language, kind of like Go or Python or something. But I think one of the main problems you would run into is like relative addressing, depending on how it's compiled. Because then if you're changing the instructions, you'll have to change like all of the immediate offsets. But that's just off the top of my head. Now I want to write this.
Well,
that's a solid point. There was a C virus that did do this module rearranging thing. I think it was called Hybrix. So this is going way back, but it did have it had separate like kind of plugins and every time it reproduced itself, it would just kind of reorder the plugins and re-encrypt each of them. And it didn't always copy each plugin to every other iteration of itself. But I imagine that inside each plugin, it was like one kind of pick module, so you didn't have to deal with fixing up the addresses.
I think it's completely possible if you have like that type of plugin style rat where you have that like post compiler that will go and change like the next iteration.
So what is your dream malware look like?
My dream malware. Well, we're sort of working on one right now. In Golang. I don't know why we chose that language.
You just made Og so happy.
we did a whole episode on current happenings in Golang malware, and that's actually like the big like our crew here is kind of like Golang malware components mostly. So that's like most of the stuff we do.
Cool. Yeah, we've got a way where we can like load. Okay, that's okay. We can load Golang objects into memory and then run them as plugins. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I have a theory about Golang malware. We when we were working on Backdoor Factory rewrite, we could not a PT note infection would not work on Golang binaries because the build ID is required to be in the PT note segment. But talking to several people, we don't think that it actually checks to see if it's a PT note segment. We think it's looking at the sections, and the sections are pointing to a note. And if you changed it to a PT load segment, you could leave the Go build ID and just put the entry point right after the ID and put your code there and do a PT load infection on the Golang binary. And so that's one of the next things we're going to try. Just for fun.
Probably worth pointing out that is something that Go only does for ELF binaries on Linux. It doesn't put the build ID in a special segment for Windows at all, which is just it's this weird thing where like the Go runtime on Linux, the Go runtime on Linux actually reads from a note segment, and it has to find certain fields there or it crashes. But
I have to bring this up. Have any of you looked at the new binaries on Ubuntu 2004 LTS? They've 95% of them have been compiled with a new flag -FCF protection. And they have 2 PT note segments, but that doesn't really matter. That second note segment is just telling you that it has those Intel CET instructions in it, right? So like tons of old ELF malware no longer works on Ubuntu 2004. That's going to be interesting to see how people work around that, because it's got those branch control. That they're like special no-ops, right? Yep. And so if it doesn't have that no-op when it returns from a call, it like seg faults.
We're gonna have to get into like fixing up injection and backdoor factory and stuff to like deal with that for sure. But so Mal, like what platforms are you predominantly targeting? Like Windows, OS X?
Mainly Linux and OS X for now. Mainly because, we've got a lot to work with. Yeah. I feel like, with Windows ATP, it's really hard to... Okay. Hold on. Sorry about that.
No worries.
With Windows ATP, it's really hard to get around like that initial execution. So when it comes to post-exploitation stuff, it's not really that fun anymore. But for Mac... finding out ways to get around like the EDR that they have now, since like EDR is super basic on Mac,
and Linux,
and Linux for that reason. Doing things sketchy in memory and trying to load things differently than Windows, like how you would do it in Windows, is like super interesting. But it's a learning curve, like especially from someone who grew up with Windows and Windows malware. You're like trying to apply similar concepts in Mac and Linux.
I'm actually not as scared of Windows ATP these days as I was at one point. Mostly because like Hell's Gate, and there's some other techniques that are kind of becoming well known for working around like the common things that that Windows EDRs do. So that arms race is definitely still going, but there definitely is this increasing body of things you have to know about how all the different EDRs measure threateningness. But my rule of thumb is like there's like some really cool automated tools now that you can put your malware in, and it will kind of inject bytes into different parts of it, and it can figure out automatically where exactly EDR is triggering. So like malware analysts use a lot more automation, but there's also automation for malware developers that helps you figure out like what is setting off the EDR.
Oh yeah, I think I kind of remember. There's a term for this that we used in like malware rule writing. It's I think it's called splitting. It's either splitting or scraping. It's basically like you taking the binary and like splicing or slicing. Yes. Or you keep slicing it until you figure out what actually triggers the rule.
Yes, that's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
So the and then the other thing I've noticed, and then so hooking DLLs is a thing they do, and there's a way to get around that. And that's kind of where Hell's Gate comes in. You can make direct system calls and bypass NTDLL, and that's a whole thing. And we have a repo for that also, which is Banana Phone, which adds this capability to Golang transparently. But on OS X, the thing everyone's always worried about, because like OS X makes a big show of, it's got that flag where like things have to be properly signed. And like, oh, you can't run this binary. It's not signed by a developer that paid $300 a year to our developer program. So it's like so go to the security tab and click like I'm a bad boy or whatever, and then we'll let you run it, right? But then one of the things that I learned from the references of your OS X training, like reading through some of the things you linked to, was that that thing is called Gatekeeper, and apparently Gatekeeper is not as scary as Apple would have you believe.
Nope. You can probably try to find the. I know they're using some type of rule writing. I know there's like YAR rules that exist there too, but there's ways where you can go and find how they're like looking for things, like that whole text edit thing where you create something with text edit and then you change the contents of the file, like either the header or something. And if it's like Mako, they may or may not like leave the quarantine on it. So those little things you can test out.
So could you so I'm not quite as familiar with this. Is kind of like the next thing I'm going to get into is like messing with Gatekeeper. So I'm wondering if you could sort of break down how Gatekeeper works a little bit.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to reverse it or look at it, but essentially that's the thing that checks. It definitely checks for the quarantine bits on your file. It checks the header and some like basic binary properties it's using to determine whether or not it's executable. It's changed a lot since I've looked at it. I think the last time I looked at it was 114. I think we're at 115 now. And I don't know what it's like for Big Sur. I know it's changed a little bit since then. But I know it's using some type of rules. I just haven't had a chance to look at it.
So one of the methods, like the reason you'd want to do dynamic library injection in the first place is because as I recall, that bypasses Gatekeeper to some extent, because it's something like it checks the signature on the original binary, but it doesn't do similar signature checks, at least under some circumstances, on libraries that are dynamically loaded.
I think in my tutorial, I think I mentioned that you can change one of the bits in the header for the signature section. I think is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you remove like say it's basically a list of the header properties, and one of the last properties is the signature section, and if you change the length of the list and you decrement it by 1, it's not going to check the signature section. And this only works if you have a um, like say you have an app, and that app has a resource section where it pulls in other uh, dilibs or other binaries, and you change the signature on there, and then it will run like no matter what, and it'll just say, oh well, signature. There's no signature on this binary. Of course, the quarantine bit is off because it's in a file that's like nested in an app, and it will run it, which is nice. So you can pretty much just go through all the resources and look for a target and remove the signature section on it, and you're good to go.
This might be a stupid question. Is there something analogous to like DLL hijacking for OS X where you could do that kind of thing?
I think yeah, I think so. I don't know if there shouldn't. I mean, it does do like a basic signature check, and I think it just like tries to loop through that list. You'll have to read the what is it, the LD preload functions that are open sourced. That's how I kind of figured that out. So it's I don't know if it's changed. I doubt it is, but I think it's really basic that it has to rely on the amount that's in the list in order to traverse it.
So going back to Golang malware for a bit, are you using totally in-house stuff that you're writing yourself, or have you found any fun Golang malware libraries you can share?
I don't. I can share them either in like the Red Team Cabal or like offline somewhere. Because if I say something now, then the blue team's gonna see it and they'll. Yeah, that's why I don't tweet stuff anymore, because they are all following me.
Yeah, they can wait and see it. And do you do CCDC or anything like that?
No.
So I usually wait until after CCDC Nationals before talking about like this year's projects.
People get so busy that it's you can't even talk to them when it's going on.
Yeah, but well, because I'm usually sort of writing stuff with the intention that people will use it for the red team for CCDC, and then I have noticed that even when I do start talking about it or do write-ups or whatever after, the same tricks still usually work a year later too. So there's a bit of a blue team lag.
I think once if they finally find the malware, then maybe I can like publish a little bit more. But since we're still writing it, I don't really want to talk too much about it. I can talk about concepts, but not the actual code.
Absolutely. I'd be super interested in hearing.
I've got a question about your site.
Sure.
What are your plans for your next tutorial or next two tutorials?
Well, I have one there that says coming soon. It's like the anti-analysis techniques. So I've compiled a list of about like 40 plus different types of anti-analysis techniques.
That's gonna be so cool.
That I plan on making like a POC for each one, and then explaining how to get around it. So I've probably completed about 10% so far. Mainly, like having a baby kind of like prolongs getting stuff done. So I'm hoping that maybe this year I can finish it. But I'm writing like each one in assembly so that I can like teach you how to get around it.
It's awesome.
I can go over. Let me open up the doc so I can like tell what types of techniques there are. Hold on,
That's gonna be so cool.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
That's gonna be so fun, and I guarantee you that in our find some of those and take them and run with them.
But as I'm finding it, you can keep talking.
So okay, let me ask you this: after you finish this, even if it takes a year or something, do you have a vision for what you would like to write about next or teach next? Break down complex ideas in the way that you do. You've got reverse engineering 101, 102. Do you have like something in your head, like a dream about what you want to do after you finish the anti-analysis techniques?
It would probably be more Mac OS stuff. It's basically a lot of it is related about stuff that I do at work. So if I'm like learning something myself, then yeah, maybe I'll want to convert that into something that I could teach.
We fully support more Mac OS stuff.
Okay, cool. Okay, so some of the actually I can just paste this in the chat here. How about that? You can see all the ones that I have ready. I have like 45 that I have planned.
Holy smokes!
Wow.
There we go.
So I see. Wow, stack strings, encrypted strings,
Like
debugger
basic stuff
checks.
first, yeah, and like recognizing them, how to get around them, that kind of thing.
Let me scroll to the bottom. API hooking bypass. IAT hooking. Rebuilding IAT with PEB. Yeah, I just did that. For the universal loader too. That is a brutal pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's very Windows heavy, but some of these can be, converted into other OSs, so it's...
Holy smokes. Wow, I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, no pressure. Take your time. But, wow.
Yeah, so I try to do one topic like every week or so, or it just depends on how much time I have. I like to do art as well, so it kind of like they kind of vie for my free time.
I feel that, like I have to play the banjo at least like a few hours a week, and if I can't, like I get frustrated. So
What kind of art projects are you working on?
Just drawing. I can share my Instagram so you can see some of my drawings. Hold on.
we'll put a link to that in the program notes.
Okay. But I like to draw things from games, like games I've been playing or shows I've been watching. Like I did one where it was the God of War. Let me see.
Sweet.
were you one of those natural talent artists, or was it something that you wanted to do and you really had to work hard and learn at it?
I think it was a natural talent because I've been drawing ever since I was, I don't know, school age. So, like elementary school. There were times where my parents had to pull me, or the teacher had to pull my parents aside and be like, "What's wrong with your child? Like she's drawing dinosaurs killing and gouging out each other." Is there?
Yeah, that's natural talent.
Yeah.
What? I don't see why teachers do that. That's what dinosaurs are supposed to do.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's what the dinosaur statues in the museum are doing.
My drawing's not weird. Barney is weird. This is natural.
Yeah. Barney is super weird. Like
that's a terrible.
That is not how dinosaurs act. All right. Well, I think with that we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Amanda Russo or Malware Unicorn after these short messages. Hey, this is Ben from the Hack the Planet podcast. You may have noticed that we didn't put out quite as many episodes this last year. And part of that was me getting ready for a talk I gave at DEF CON called Golang Malware Bonanza, which you can check out on YouTube. And then part of that was we all thought the pandemic was over for a minute and started to have a big party. And then the rest of it was basically realizing the pandemic was not over and being sort of bummed out about it. Although then there was the untold story of our attempt at an episode which never saw the light of day, which we might tell at some point. But in the intervening time period between recording this interview and releasing this interview, the kid in the background has learned to walk and also wield objects. So that puts things in some amount of perspective. So we do have some things to plug. We have a new favorite makerspace, which is hosting our free workshop events in the Seattle area. It's seattlemakers.org. It's a great makerspace, which has recently moved to a new location near Gasworks Park in Northlake. And they're really doing some awesome stuff building out that space right now. And they're now hosting 2 of our events. We have a new event, Network Hacking 101, which is hosted by Victor Graff. In addition to our hardware hacking workshop, which is hosted by me. You can find both of those events on meetup.com if you search for Symbol Crash. Also, Malware Unicorn has a new training out on PE injection, looking at the crypto wall malware, and you can check that out at malwareunicorn.org. And with that, back to Malware Unicorn. And we're back with Amanda Russo. So, couple of questions for the back 40. So one project I know you were involved with, I think, I'm guessing while you were at Endgame. I also don't know how to pronounce this one. Is Zori?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or Xori?
Zori. It's Zori.
Zori.
It sounded cute, so I like the XOR thing, and I just added I on it. It sounded cute.
Well, some people say XOR and some people say Zor, so it's
yeah.
XOR.
But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I was trying to do some like automated disassembly, I was trying to look for a solution, and I didn't want to use IDA because I wanted something like on the command line. And then I tried Radari, and I wanted to rip my hair out because it kept crashing.
I don't know why there's so many R2 fans either.
We're posting an exploit for R2 in this next scene too.
Boy, the man page for Radari is like long and confusing, and every single time I've looked at it to use Radari to solve any problem, I've just ended up writing my own code that does it. So I'm not. It's like the man page is like a good explanation of what you should go write as code, and it's just easier to go write my own code than it is to figure out how to use their thing to do it. But
assemblers have their strengths and weaknesses, and I think Radari is really good on like obscure architectures, just not like for everyday C reversing. And then that's my opinion though. Like, if command line reverse engineering is your thing, that's cool. It's not for me.
I just like it for looking at the static analysis. That's it.
Well, I mainly just look in there because it has like ROP chain solving stuff. I gather if you figure out how to invoke it correctly. I just invariably find it easier to use either different tools for that or just to do it manually. But just back to Zori. So what does Zori do for you?
So I wanted to make it to like do automated disassembly, and try to have something that I can run on like thousands of or even like hundreds of thousands of samples from VirusTotal. And so that was the whole point of it. And I needed something stable and something I could write really quickly. So I was like, hey, well, I guess I should learn Rust. So I was like, let's make a disassembler with Rust.
Oh, wow.
So, the best way to learn a new language is to write a project in it, right? So I wanted something that I could use with another, I guess, project that we were working on at the time that was also in Rust. So it was kind of like a way to connect the two. Since I left, it kind of like fizzled out and maintenance, since it's like under my previous company's like name. I mean, I forked it on my own site, but I haven't really messed with it since. But the idea was to have like some fast way to get the different types of branches and like because there's different ways how disassemblers go down code, right? There's you keep jumping into jump into the calls where you keep going down the different branches versus like a flat disassembly where it goes and checks like the next instruction. And I think IDA is the first type where it goes down the different branches, and then Radari is like a flat like we'll just try to disassemble one by one instruction after another. So I kind of had like a hybrid approach between the two, because I didn't have too much time to make it a lot better. And for different architectures, it's stuck with just like Windows-based things. But what I did was I kind of made like the whole process memory stack there, where you can access like a fake PEB and a fake TEB, so that in case it was doing like the PEB loader, the PEB loader style where it goes and looks up FS30 and then tries to traverse the list in order to rebuild the AIT, it would be able to do that. And I think I mentioned that in the slides as well. Basically, I just like read the code for the NTDLL loader and tried to like mimic it. So
I've done that myself. It's GS60 if it's 64-bit. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it does that. And at the time I had an intern, and I had him create the UI for it. I made him learn React, and so that's kind of like what that UI that you see in the repo is. So we kind of worked on that together. Cool story though, because he learned to do that while he was an intern. He made it. He kind of took that and wanted to create a startup with it. So right now he's trying to create a startup that is like multi-user reverse engineering platform where you can like reverse engineer together on like a nice UI. He's still working on it, so I don't know what state it's in. At least he's got backers.
That sounds kind of familiar. Can you say the name?
Yeah, it's let me find his.
Is it Crowd something?
No, let me see. He changed the name of it.
Binge actually has that now. They actually have like a web, like, and it's free too. It's not as cool as Ori, but like it's free. It's online.
So are you actually using lib capstone?
No. So basically I looked at how Capstone was doing it, and I made everything completely in Rust. There's no like external libraries.
Holy smokes!
That's crazy. That's I looked at how Capstone was doing it, and I did it in Rust.
So Capstone, no one has ported Capstone to Go, which is a pain point for me.
I don't know if you want to do low-level stuff in Go, to be honest.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But
he does.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's optimal, he still does.
Yeah, that's what I do. But having like a fully like Capstone is a totally complete disassembly library that has like every architecture and like all the instructions for every architecture and all their side effects and like absolutely everything in there. And it is an enormous amount of work to port even one architecture, I would say, out of Capstone and into something else. I guess the one advantage to writing something in Rust initially is that no one can come along later and be like, you should rewrite this in Rust, because that happens to 100% of non-Rust projects at some point. But I have not yet gotten into Rust, but I have just legions of people that tell me I should rewrite everything in Rust, and anything I do, they're like, why haven't you written this in Rust? But is it fast?
Yeah. So if you go look at the different speeds, besides C, like Rust comes in second, and then I think it's Golang, and then like the other higher level languages. But one of the things, if you are making with any higher level language, right, your malware is going to be big, so it's going to be at least like 3 or 4 megabytes, at least, which is like all the basic libraries. So you have to consider that, or put like a packer on it, or some type of compression. But if you're just doing it for development, yeah, it's super fast. And
Well, I think
coding in Rust is really fun too, because the compiler is really nice and tells you where you fucked up.
Oh, maybe I'll give it a shot. I've had a couple of people tell me. What was a good resource to, if you already know some other programming languages and you just want to switch to Rust? Is there like a effective Rust document you went back to a lot?
No, I just, you know how they have like that Rust playground? I just sit there and mess with that and then look up the documentation. You know me, I would go just directly to the compiler code and see how everything is and read the documentation. If I don't know something, or sit there and compile and test out and break something and try it again.
Rewrite Rust in Capstone.
So I think Rust Rust produces smaller binaries than Go, though, right?
Slightly smaller. I think the base is like 3 megabytes, and then Go is 4 or 5, depending on how big it is.
Go's like 1.2 megs for the runtime, and that's the part you can't reduce much. There's a couple linker flags you can add that'll bring it down to like maybe 800K if you strip out all the symbols and everything.
Yeah. It depends on how big the project is too, right? Like if you're loading in a lot of other libraries, like external libraries, and it becomes kind of big.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I don't like about Go is that, you have to import a whole URL in order to get what you want, and rather than just like having something local.
Well, it does when you pull in libraries in Go, it does statically compile it, so it only actually includes the code that you're using, with the exception of like some stuff for reflection, which you can strip out, and the flat overhead of the runtime.
And the dwarf signatures.
You can strip out the dwarf signatures.
Yeah, but it includes them by default.
So the LD flags, the -S-W, I think strip out all that stuff, and then but the thing that you can't reduce is the overhead of the runtime itself, and they don't apply that static compilation logic to the runtime, and that's the kind of the annoying thing. So we're like,
strings.
We're using a bunch of pseudonyms on Go mailing lists to try and lobby for that to change, so they won't figure out who's asking for that to change. So they won't figure out who's asking into that so far. But
one of the things you can also do with Rust is use Moosel to get fully statically linked binaries without like external libc dependencies. I'm not sure if you can do that with how easy it is to do that with Go.
Go only does that.
Yeah, you can do that with Go.
Okay, cool.
Go is always statically.
Oh, that's right.
You have to go way out of your way to include anything, but by default, Go is just one giant statically compiled binary.
Yeah, it actually used to be way worse because the linker, until actually relatively recently, didn't just include the code you were using. It would just include the whole package.
Oof.
And that used to be a tactic. Like I used to go after, like you would find a piece of good malware that had like a golib that it was like obfuscated enough that like it was kind of hard to nail down. So then you go find a bad one that has like the same library, and even if they don't use any of the functions, like they're all in there.
So I'm going to ask you a question, but I don't want to put you on the spot. So when I did my like thesis project in college, one of the professors I was presenting to at the end was like, how did you evaluate your project? And I hadn't really done a lot of evaluation on it. So I just said like, well, I like it. And everyone laughed. And then they let that kind of slide. But I'm wondering did you run this on like large batches of stuff from VirusTotal, and what kind of performance did you see?
Yeah. It was mainly, I think I ran it on like 100 samples for did I lose it? Okay, it's still there. I think I ran it on like 100 samples to see how it did, and how fast it was. Because we were trying to build like a backend VM, automated VM service, and I wanted to have like the automated disassembly ready after was like evaluated dynamically. So it was like static versus dynamic, and it did all right. The main thing with all types of binaries is trying to disassemble without human there, right? So sometimes there are ways in which you're trying to traverse down a sample, and then say there's like some anti-analysis or packing going on that you just didn't encounter. So a lot of these edge cases I found were so much that I would have to probably be developing full time in order to and cover all of those bases. So it was basic enough so I can get my job done and look at samples really quickly while I was helping develop this automated VM system. So it was more like of a tool that eventually wanted to be turned into like a product. But since I left, of course, it never got into a product. So it's mainly like a quick disassembly tool.
So I want to ask, so the number one question that people ask me online is, of course, how do I hack? But the number two question, the number two question that people actually ask me is like, I want to set up some kind of VM based thing for, sandboxing malware or running malware. And there is, of course, like AnyRun, which is cloud hosted. And I know some people like that if they don't want to get too into it. But there seems to be a lot of kind of components for a system like this on GitHub, but it seems like a lot of people are still kind of rolling their own. And I guess I'm wondering, it's like if I was interested in setting up some kind of like VM malware sandbox thing, what would you recommend going with in this day and age?
So are you saying like start from like a noob perspective, or like someone who really wants to, get serious of make a really good environment?
Well, I'd take both answers.
Okay. So from a new perspective, I would just use any type of like online service like hybrid analysis or something. As far as like online services go, I think Joe's Sandbox is probably the best in my opinion that I've looked at. Even though it's not free, they have some really detailed reports. It's really nice. And they also do different architectures. Yeah, Joe Sandbox.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're trying to do something from scratch though, Cuckoo is still the best if you want to set up like a basic, Windows box. Another thing, if you want to do the hardcore way, is you would use Zen. You use Zen as a hypervisor, and then you make your custom VM through that, and then use the instrumentation with Zen to control the inner workings and control the memory and API calls from outside of the VM. That way,
BSD, right?
yeah, that way, you have like this complete separation where the malware doesn't know that it's in a VM. In this case, it would be like the hypervisor running everything. So you wouldn't have the same artifacts that a VM would have. So you can get
like the Cirrus video driver or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that's how DEF CON CTF has worked for a number of years. Is they just use BSD with a syscall emulation layer, and it's basically the same thing.
Are there like Zen sandbox management packages out there, or is this something people are mostly rolling themselves?
I think it's definitely something people are rolling themselves. A lot of people are starting to adopt the Zen hypervisor. I know AWS used to be is like a Zen fork. I think Cubes is also on Zen, which I use as one of my work computer operating systems. But it's just a different. It's more interesting to work with a hypervisor than it is like VMware or VirtualBox or QEMU.
And hopefully someone like yourself who has a little bit more time will come along and write a beautiful, easy to understand tutorial that I can understand.
And
on hypervisors?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Zen in the art of malware analysis.
Okay.
Yes.
Spelled with an X.
I have a super non sequitur, like just Mac question. I just kind of want to throw out there.
Sure.
So like, do you have a preferred tactic for visualizing the horrible Cocoa dispatcher when REing stuff? Because like that is I constantly have this problem where like pick a disassembler and I load an OSX thing and I'm like, oh, it's using Coco stuff. It's not just using regular stuff because I can see all the like dispatch code, with like the string that goes into the thing with all the arguments and like you can't trace all the buffers and stuff. And like I don't always want to load it up in a debugger and like actually trace every buffer because that's a ton of work. And so like every pro I've seen has like their script for the debugger or for the disassembler that they like that basically changes the IL to like make sense.
Debugging on OS X is a ridiculous pain in the butt to begin with.
Yeah.
Throwing it in LLDB is really not that bad.
Well, now LLDB has the GDB server like baked into it on like Big Sur, right? You can just like enable GDB server and then attach to it, which is a lot nicer than it used to be since they don't let you use any other debugger because they have only half deprecated IPC at this point.
Have you tried like IDA and then you could connect to the debugger?
Oh yeah, no, I mean I've gotten debugging to work on OS X like with LLDB. Like I've gotten it to work with Cutter and I've gotten it to work with a Binary Ninja plugin, and then I've gotten it to work with IDA. But like if I don't want to debug it, I just want to look at it like to do the very beginnings of static. Like I
just throw it in IDA and I feel pain every single time I look at it. But I don't really have too many tools. I'm like one of those people that just use one or two tools to do stuff.
Okay. I just didn't know if you had like your own Coco like undispatcher script thing.
No. I know there's another disassembler called Hopper that's really good with Coco, but the interface is not that great.
The interface is not that great, and it didn't have debugging support until recently. But it was like for a long time until like Ghidra came out, and then every other debugger stole its decompiler to have its IL, which is badass. Like I'm not complaining, but like until that happened, the only way that you could look at OS X disassembly and have it not just be ridiculously horrible was to use Hopper because they kind of did it before Ghidra was public, where like there was some kind of abstraction, like kind of IL, or like if you didn't want to pay for hex rays, like that's what you did. And now that like Cutter and everything else like that, and Cutter 2.0, because it's forked from the Radar 2 Cutter, which is all now that they all just use a binary version of Ghidra's decompiler and then use that as its abstraction language, like that's super nice. That's basically what I use for everything. But the one thing that's still a pain in the ass is the Coco dispatcher, right? It's like, I don't want to, because you just get hex addresses, right? You don't actually get the strings, even though it like technically knows where the strings are.
Yeah.
Speaking of sources of pain in OS X reversing, have you looked at the M1 Mac? The M1 Mac is on a different architecture or chassis, as we'll say now, and it involves an entirely different assembly language. So it's like ARM64 instead of AMD64, which is doubly confusing because if you look at those really quick, they don't look visually different. It's like A letter 64 or A letter 64. But
and ARM64 is just such an unusual platform on itself too.
ARM64 is weird. The assembly is weird,
super weird.
But have you like played with anything on the M1 yet?
No. My husband got the M1 also, and he won't let me play with it. So I'm waiting for my work to give me one. So
it seems like a reasonable decision.
He wants a working computer. What?
I was gonna say that's how it works, right? Like you get they get a thing and they see you looking at it and they're like, "No, this one is not for hacking. Go away."
Yeah.
It's bad when your own husband has to like segment you off the network because you play with malware.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
I got an M1 just to. I got an M1.
I
got an M1 just to make your loader method work on it, just to make sure it still worked.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so
Did
it did work. It totally works. On the M1, I did have to write some Go assembly targeting ARM64.
Told you.
to make some of the innards work. I did put a blog post up about that relatively recently, but yeah, Go Assembly is a whole other weird pocket universe. Where they have their own assembler just for Go, which is based on the Plan 9 assembler, and it's a nightmare. And it's also different for every platform. So I don't know why they made their own assembler if it's
because
totally different.
runtime uses the Plan 9 calling convention no matter what operating system you're on.
Yeah. No, I mean,
the switch every time it calls a system function because it doesn't use that calling convention.
Yeah. I mean, I have some theories, but I don't really know.
Do these theories all start with the words Rob and Pike?
Shh. We're trying not to. We will not speak his name. But yes. Okay. One more question, and I kind of hate to ask, but I would like to kind of get your opinion on this. So you're on Twitter. You must have seen at some point the offensive security tools debate.
About releasing them?
Yeah. We don't need to dwell on the. We've already gone on several rants about it. But I think your perspective is like someone who looks at social media and used to do malware analysis for like FireEye and other places, and then switched to writing malware for red team purposes. I'd be interested in your take on the OST debate.
It's kind of I think it's bullshit that people say, oh, people shouldn't release tools. But these malware analysts will write a whole detailed report on malware and expect that people are not going to copy the techniques that they talk about. So if you're releasing tools and it's like a security researcher releasing tools, of course hopefully they're not going to give you the full nice everything is done for you type of tool. They're going to leave some stuff out, of course. Then it's for learning purposes, and if you're staying up to date with tools and malware, you should be collecting all of those and testing your environment with them. So I think I don't see where the complaints are. Even with that one guy from what's his name? He released a ransomware sample code, and he got some flack for it, and he did it so that people can learn how ransomware works, and he got so much flack for it. It's stuff like that these skitties will take some of that code and try to make their own and then break it. It's all about lowering that bar.
Is that a Letterkenny reference?
What?
Skitties?
No,
Skitties?
Your spare parts, bud.
Script kiddies.
Script kitties.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Using slang terms.
I thought it was like this, like the skids that they say at Letterkenny. It's like
no, I say skitties.
Oh, I like it.
Skids is my thing. That's what I call them. Skids.
All right.
Do I get to do the obligatory? We had this argument in the '90s with a non-sec, and we already decided way back then.
Yeah.
Well, I just think it's easier to complain about something on Twitter than do your job. But
yeah.
Twitter.
Yeah, I don't even get on Twitter. But
was that Fight Me Blue Team?
Yeah.
Well, I do definitely identify with that response, which is interesting because I went from someone who used to make malware for red teamy stuff, who's now a blue teamer. I'm an honest to God threat hunter. And when I was a red teamer, I was like, oh, this is a stupid argument. And now that I'm a blue teamer, I'm like, God, you people are stupid. If the red teamer and the blue teamer get the same tool at the same time, and it takes you longer to write a detection than it does for them to weaponize it, you suck at your job. That's
For
all I got
real.
for you.
Right. That's always been my angle of the whole argument is shouldn't you be thanking us? Isn't there a need to say thank you for giving somebody the tool to be lazy enough to just standardize onto one homogeneous
Yeah.
source of signal. Like, why are you getting mad at making the problem space easier? Like,
It's like the folks that make exploits, right? They release the POCs. How come they don't get flack for releasing the POC?
Oh, they do.
Well, it's not so much of a heated debate as it is with tools. At least that's not what I see.
If you never read Twitter, you never get any flack. So that's my solution. Yeah, but actually, so what Dan just said, there is something I did notice with the SolarWinds thing. There's a kind of overfitting that happens in the write-up sometimes. So like FireEye, for example, wrote up like the definitive, document, like we reversed it. These were the indicators of compromise and all this stuff. And they said up front that like we saw, the attackers were spinning up different cloud infrastructure in the, like for each target potentially. Because they were just spinning up cloud nodes to be the C2. And they said that up front. And then at the end they said, here's the list of indicators of compromise that we pulled out by looking at, our, like us being targeted. And if you read it carefully, you would have figured out that almost all of those indicators of compromise, at least the network ones, would probably not apply to you.
Yep.
But most blue teams got that document, didn't read any of the text in the first few pages, and just went to the end, indicators of compromise, and they entered that into their IDS or whatever. And then they called it
TLDR,
good.
thanks for the SIGs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's also that's a really good example, because the other thing there is that, like, I feel like so FireEye came out with their write-up first because, if one believes the narrative that the internet told you, like, they're the ones that found it, right? They like found it and they were like, hey, we think we got kind of popped by this thing. We dug into it. Oh, it came from our vendor. Oh, that's a big vendor. And like, that was the chain of custody, right? And so the reason that's important is because they profiled the sample of the implant that got used on them before they got to like the details of the attack. And then the details of the attack in some of those IOCs are actually pretty damn fuzzy, right? And all the write-ups that have happened since have all been about the different implants that the same attack was used to drop. So actually, if you're doing blue team, it's like, all this is great. Like, I mean, thanks for publishing what you have, but it's all basically fucking useless because they were a decent enough attacker that, like, clearly the people that actually did the thing, like, sold access to other folks, and the other folks launched, like, their ninja payloads or whatever. And while telemetry on the ninja payloads is great, like, if you're a blue teamer, that ain't the bug, right? That's just generalized threat intel. That's not what you write detections for. You write detections for the actual methods of, like, if my agent ever drops something, right?
Yep.
Like, and nobody's writing. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but like, the people that are writing those detections are not the people bitching on Twitter.
All right. Final thoughts, anyone? Dan?
Always getting called out. No, I'm good. This is great.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you so much for well, first of all, for just making these amazing trainings. I hope you get back to it. I look forward to the anti-analysis one especially. But I'm sure anything you come up with in the future would be great. Let's see, like maybe in 2-3 years, you might have some like how to hack training for 4-year-olds.
Maybe. Yeah.
That'd be super cool.
Secret agenda would be to just thanks for answering all my pestering DM questions.
No worries.
About OSX stuff, and I guess like there's an odd cadre of I mean, I don't know what else to call them, like DEF CON parents. So I guess like welcome to that club.
Thanks.
Because that's a thing. So
Well, we don't want to put any pressure on the kid. If they want to be an artist or whatever, that's perfectly fine. I mean, there is I am kind of curious what a third generation infosec person would be like.
Just say no to NFTs.
I mean, at least your kid still has a choice. There's literally already a picture of my kid standing next to Nikita's kid at DEF CON in 2019. So, like, he's already screwed.
Yeah. We'll see if she'll be able to go. You know, being a pandemic baby, it'll be interesting to see how she goes up.
Oh.
Hey, thanks for coming on our show.
Yeah.
I really enjoy your stuff, and also really enjoyed hearing about your thought process, how you go about things. That was very interesting to me, and I think everyone else as well.
Problem. It was fun. I got to nerd out a little bit.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Until next time, I guess now more than ever, hacking's not just a crime. It's a
survival
trade. I really wish we hadn't standardized on that.
Yeah,
I know.
I feel like the IEEE.
Too late now.